Hello students and welcome to this lecture on evaluating minority rights in practice. While India's constitution guarantees equality and protection to minorities under Articles 25 to 30, the real challenge lies in implementation. Minority rights are not only about legal guarantees but also about tangible improvements in education, employment and representation. Despite numerous policy initiatives, empirical data shows persistent disparities, especially amongst Muslims, Christians, Sikhs, Buddhists, and Parsis, the officially recognized religious minorities. The Sachar Committee Report 2006 and Ranganath Mishra Commission 2007 revealed that large sections of the Muslim population face socio-economic conditions similar to or worse than those of scheduled castes. Government interventions like Pradhan Mantri Jan Vikas Karyakram, PMJVK and Nai Roshni aim to bridge these gaps. However, structural issues such as regional inequality, administrative inefficiency, and lack of awareness continue to limit effectiveness. Evaluating minority rights in practice means going beyond policy intent to assess measurable outcomes. This lecture examines the ground realities, linking data, schemes, and governance to understand how far India has progressed towards its constitutional promise of justice, equality, and fraternity for all citizens, irrespective of religion or belief. The Constitution of India enshrines several safeguards for minorities. Articles 25 to 30 guarantee freedom of religion, cultural autonomy, and the right to establish educational institutions. Article 350B created the Office of the Special Officer for Linguistic Minorities, while 29 protects cultural identity. The National Commission for Minorities Act 1992 institutionalized administrative protection, empowering the Commission to monitor implementation of policies. Additionally, Article 46 directs the state to promote the educational and economic interests of weaker sections, including minorities. Despite this comprehensive framework, implementation remains inconsistent due to bureaucratic delays, underfunding, and lack of disaggregated data. Minority protection requires coordination amongst central ministries, state departments, and local bodies. The effectiveness of constitutional guarantees depends on policy translation into real opportunities. Quality schooling, fair recruitment, housing access, and entrepreneurship support. The framework exists. The challenge lies in bridging the gap between paper rights and live realities. India's secular democracy is judged not by declarations but by how inclusively these rights are realized in daily governance. The Sachar Committee report submitted to the Prime Minister in November 2006 remains the most comprehensive study on India's Muslim community. It revealed alarming socio-economic indicators. Muslims lagged behind not only upper castes but also scheduled castes and tribes in education, employment, and income. Only 4% of Muslim children attended government schools beyond class 10th, and Muslim representation in higher education was just 6%. In government employment, Muslims constituted under 5% of administrative services and less than 4% of the police force. The report highlighted poor access to credit, housing discrimination, and spatial segregation in urban areas. It concluded that the community's marginalization was structural, requiring targeted interventions. The Sachar Committee recommended data-based monitoring, equitable recruitment, improved access to scholarship, and minority concentration area development. Its findings reframe minority policy from welfare to inclusion. asserting that equitable participation, not charity, is the measure of secular democracy. The report remains a foundational reference for understanding the implementation gap in India's minority rights system. However, what it lacked was the role of community itself. How the community is imbibing all these benefits, how much efforts and initiatives the community itself is taking, like Christians or the Parsis. So that element was missing in the such a committee report, and in my opinion that element is still missing whenever we make any study on the social economic status of the Muslims. Only government efforts, policies, welfare schemes are not enough. The Rangnath Mishra Commission Report 2007 built on these such findings, analyzing both religious and linguistic minorities. It recommended 10% reservation for Muslims and 5% for other minorities in government jobs and education. The Commission also advised including Dalit Muslims and Dalit Christians in the scheduled caste category to ensure parity of opportunity. It proposed setting up equal opportunity commissions at the central and state levels to monitor anti-discrimination measures. Additionally, it urged integration of minority concerns into mainstream development programs rather than creating isolated welfare schemes. Critics argued that reservations based on religion might conflict with constitutional secularism. Yet, the recommendations highlighted the persistent structural exclusion faced by minorities. Despite its a progressive framework, few proposals were implemented. The Mishra report exposed the disconnect between recommendations and political will. Together, Sachin and Mishra's findings underscore that effective minority protection requires sustained institutional mechanisms beyond episodic schemes to embed equality with governance system. However, both fail to acknowledge the role of the community itself. According to Census 2011 and NSSO data, minorities constitute roughly 20% of India's population, with Muslims forming the largest group, that is 14.2%. Despite urban concentration, their literacy rate 68.5% remains below the national average. Female literacy amongst Muslims is only 62% compared to 74% amongst Hindus and 83% among Christians. Workforce participation among minorities is also lower. Muslim employment in organized sectors remains below 6%. Poverty levels are significantly higher among Muslim households, particularly in Uttar Pradesh, Bihar and West Bengal. Christians and Sikhs show relatively better educational attainment but face regional disparities. Buddhist communities, mainly Neo-Buddhist, report higher literacy but economic vulnerability. These statistics reveal that minority disadvantage is not uniform but multi-layered, combining religion, region and gender. Policy responses often remain generalized rather than data specific. Well, one need to analyze why the literacy rate is 83% among Christians and why it is so low amongst Muslims, only 62%. So, definitely it is indicative of the extra efforts on the part of the community also. Now, understanding these figures is essential to evaluating how schemes like PMJVK or Nai Roshni perform in addressing actual social economic inequality on the ground. But definitely we need to look into other dimensions also. The Ministry of Minority Affairs runs several key schemes to uplift minority communities. The Pradhan Mantri Jan Vikas Karyakram focuses on infrastructure in minority concentration areas, funding schools, hostels, health centers, and community assets. Nai Roshni aims at leadership and confidence building amongst minority women. Seekho or Kamao provides skill development for youth, while Naya Savera supports coaching for competitive examination. USTTAD promotes traditional arts and craft. Collectively, these programs reflect an integrated approach to education, employment, and empowerment. And however, monitoring reports reveal uneven fund utilization. Some states underperform, citing bureaucratic delays and lack of awareness. Community participation and transparency remains weak, limiting long-term impact. The ministry's recent reform, including digital dashboards and geotagging of projects, aim to improve accountability. Yet, success depends on sustained investment and local level inclusion. Government schemes can reduce inequality, but their transformative potential is realized only when execution matches vision. Therefore, the role of community initiatives and the role of civic society within that community is very, very important in attaining benefit of all these schemes by the government. They need to be trickled down to the lowest ladder, which is perhaps the weakest zone of any community. And the initiatives on the part of the community and the presence of enlightened community is very significant if the execution has to match the vision. Prime Minister PMJVK, formerly Multi-Sectoral Development Program, is India's flagship minority area development scheme. It targets 1300 minority concentration areas based on population and social economic indicators. PMJVK funds essentially infrastructures such as schools, ITIs, hospitals and skill centers. Between 2014 and 2023, over 16,000 crore were sanctioned, benefiting nearly 25 million people. Yet evaluation reports show gaps, project delays, uneven coverage and limited coordination with local panchayats. States like Kerala and Tamil Nadu perform better due to active community involvement, while northern states lag behind. Gender inclusivity and awareness remain limited, reducing impact amongst women and youth. Nevertheless, PMJVK's integrated model aligns development with inclusion, reinforcing that infrastructure is not just economic, it is social justice in physical form. For genuine empowerment, PMJVK must evolve from a fund-driven initiative into a participatory framework connecting minority aspirations with constitutional promises of equality and dignity. And here comes the role of civic society, NGOs and minorities commission to help trickle down the benefits of such schemes to the lowest ladder of the community. And it is the responsibility of the institutions like Minority Commission to come out in the field and help in the proper implementation of PMJVK so that every needy or the targeted group or individual can have benefits of such schemes. Nai Roshni, launched in 2012, is the first national leadership program for minority women. It focuses on awareness, confidence building and community leadership amongst women aged 18 to 65. The program provides short-term training on legal rights, financial literacy, health and digital skills, and of course entrepreneurship. By 2023, over 6.5 lakh women across 29 states had benefited. Studies indicate positive social outcomes, greater self-confidence, better participation in local governance, and higher awareness of rights. However, structural barriers such as low mobility, patriarchal norms, and poor post-training follow-up reduce sustainability. The program's success lies in linking empowerment to community development, showing that gender equality is central to minority progress. Experts recommend institutionalizing alumni networks and linking Nai Roshni graduates with microfinance and entrepreneurship schemes. When effectively implemented, Nai Roshni transforms empowerment from an abstract goal into live social change. helping women move from the margins of policy to the center of leadership. Institutional mechanisms, national and state level bodies. India has several institutional mechanisms to safeguard minority rights. The National Commission for Minorities, established under the 1992 Act, monitors the implementation of constitutional and legal safeguards. It investigates complaints, advises the government, and promotes inter-community harmony. State minorities commissions and minority welfare department replicate this framework regionally. The Ministry of Minority Affairs coordinates policies across sectors. However, capacity constraints and overlapping jurisdictions weaken effectiveness. Many commissions lack enforcement powers, depending on ministries for implementation. Budget allocations for minority affairs remain below 0.2% of total expenditure, limiting reach. Strengthening these institutions through legal empowerment, data system and accountability audits is essential. The presence of formal institutions is a strength, but without autonomy and resources, they risk becoming symbolic. Ensuring institutional credibility is key to bridging the gap between constitutional ideals and policy outcomes in India's complex minority protection ecosystem. Well, education access and quality gaps. Education remains the most critical determinant of minority empowerment, yet it reveals significant disparities. The Sacha Committee found that only 17% of Muslims reached secondary education compared to 26% amongst Hindus. 2 decades later, Niti Aayog data shows progress, but the gap persists. Minority-dominated districts often suffer from poor school infrastructure, inadequate teachers, and high output rates, especially amongst girls. Enrollment in higher education amongst Muslims remains at 5%, nearly half the national average. Government scholarships like pre-metric and post-metric minority scholarships have improved access for millions, but implementational inefficiencies, delays, leakages, and uneven state participation dilute their impact. Quality of education is as crucial as access to these schemes. Minority schools often lack science and technology facilities, and here comes the debate of modernizing the madrasas so that the institutions which is catering to the lowest ladder of the Muslim community can have access to modern education, science and technology. PMJVK has tried to bridge this infrastructure gap but needs local monitoring. Real educational reform demands a multi-tiered approach, universal access, curriculum modernization and social awareness campaigns to ensure minorities are not only educated but also equipped for equal participation in India's development journey. Employment and economic participation. The data reveals a continuing gap between minorities and the national workforce average. The Sacha report showed Muslims had less than 5% of central government jobs, and this figure has improved only marginally. Since self-employment dominates minority livelihoods, with over 46% of Muslim workers in informal or unorganized sectors. Access to institutional credit remains low due to bias, lack of documentation and awareness barriers. Schemes such as Nai Manzil and USTTAD aim to link traditional skills with modern markets, yet outcomes vary regionally. Urban minorities face underemployment, while rural minorities rely heavily on a subsistence labor. Women's participation remains particularly low, below 12% amongst Muslim women. The Stand Up India and PMEGP programs have potential for inclusive entrepreneurship, but minority representation remains limited. Economic empowerment requires not just financial aid, but social acceptance and skill linkage also. Strengthening minority cooperatives, vocational education, and inclusive banking is vital to translating constitutional promises into economic security and self reliance. Well, health, housing, and basic services. Access to basic amenities remains a serious implementation gap in minority welfare. Such a report revealed that Muslim majority localities often overlap with low human development indices, poor sanitation, unsafe housing, and limited health care. A decade later, NFHS 5-2021 data confirm similar trends. Minorities in urban slums face higher child mortality and malnutrition rates. The PMJVK has financed health sub-centers, but coverage remains uneven. Housing programs like PMAY benefits minorities definitely, and one of the biggest beneficiaries are considered to be Muslims, but due to lack of documentation issues and spatial segregation, the benefit is little less as it could have been rather. Many minority settlements are labeled informal or restricting infrastructure development. Discrimination in renting and housing loans further worsen exclusion. Health and housing are linked to dignity and equality, but Ayushman Bharat is equally available to everyone. What we need is extra efforts on the part of the community also, and the institutions like National Minorities Commission, who have to really increase their reach to these communities. The national programs like Ayushman Bharat and Swachh Bharat Abhiyan, of course, they are very, very important in integrating minority health initiatives with the existing national programs. Targeted community-based interventions and reliable data collected are essential to ensure equitable access to basic services, fulfilling the constitutional mandate of inclusive development. Well, despite constitutional protection, minorities claim that they continue to experience subtle and systemic forms of discrimination. There are reports that have documented that Muslim job applicants with identical qualification received fewer callbacks than others. Discrimination persists in housing, education, admissions, and credit access. Social biases often intersect with class and gender, compounding vulnerability. Communal tensions and identity-based profiling deepen alienation, affecting youth confidence and integration. The Rangnath Mishra Commission also proposed an Equal Opportunity Commission to address such grievances, but implementation remains pending. The absence of dedicated anti-discrimination law means not only minorities, but everyone has to rely just on general human rights framework. You see, an important role has to be played by the civil society organizations, and the people themselves have to change their mindset and discourage phenomena like hate speech and stereotyping. So discrimination is not merely a legal issue, it is a social and moral issue also, and it has a lot to do with the design of the social fabric. So if we all are biased and discriminatory and communal in our mindset, undemocratic, definitely we cannot create a secular democratic society. We need to come up with the acts of discrimination, violence and terrorism committed by anyone. We don't have to identify ourselves with all these things, and we have to be vocal about, whenever the discrimination is done against anyone or violence does against anyone, not only the minorities, then only we can create a society with secular and democratic mindset, which is the need of the hour if we have to bring about an overall development of the society. Gender inequality within minority communities presents a dual challenge. Patriarchal norms intersect with religious marginalization. The such a report showed that Muslim women have amongst the lowest literacy and employment rates nationally. Through programs like Nai Roshni and Nai Manzil aims to empower women, participation remains low due to social constraints and the keto and backward mindset of the community itself. When the community is not ready to accept the change, why the fertility rate is lower in the Christian community than the Muslim community? Why the literacy rate and the economic independence rate for women is higher in the Christians and the Parsis than the Muslim? The community needs to recogitate. The way a community acted in Shah Bano case, where under the pressure of the community, and a destitute poor old woman refused to accept a small amount of 200 rupees uh, as per the Supreme Court judgment. Obviously, we can think of what is the mindset of the community towards women rights and towards gender justice. The community also has to change itself and encourage its own women to come up and fight against injustices. They have to change the mindset to allow women to go out and study. Only laws and schemes cannot do enough. Triple Talaq judgment, Shara Bano symbolized judicial activism towards gender justice, but it requires social reinforcement. If the society is not ready to accept lifelong maintenance for a destitute woman or refuse un-Islamic practices of triple talaq at one instance, then law cannot do much. Minority women faces lots of barriers like in accessing healthcare, inheritance and leadership positions. Policy initiative must move beyond protection towards participation. How we can bring about participation of Muslim women, and that for that the commission has to really go inside the community. They have to create volunteers to really make people understand that women rights, women education and healthcare is essential. Successful local models such as women's self-help groups in Kerala and minority women's entrepreneurship clusters demonstrate the power of collective agency, the civic society and the people themselves. Gender equity with minority development cannot be achieved in isolation. It must integrate education, rights awareness, enlightened community, etc., etc. So, empowering minority women strengthens both community as well as democracy, transforming constitutional ideals into live equality at the grassroots. Implementation barriers and administrative gaps. Despite robust policy framework, implementation challenges remain pervasive. Bureaucratic fragmentation between central and state agencies causes duplication and delays. Budget utilization under minority schemes averages only 70% annually, with several projects stalled due to lack of monitoring. The Comptroller and Auditor General reports highlight inefficiencies in fund tracking and outcome measurements. Grassroots awareness about schemes is limited, particularly in remote or conflict affected areas. Most of the women are unaware. There's lack of not only literacy but also digital literacy, and therefore they are unable to make use of the government schemes and plans through mobile apps and all. Political changes often disrupt continuity of programs also, but thankfully we are having a continuity of the political regime, and therefore we can have the continuity of schemes also. Weak coordination between education, skill development and financial departments leads to fragmented impact. Experts recommend creating an integrated digital monitoring platform linking all minority welfare schemes. But if there is lack of digital literacy, if there is lack of awareness amongst the people, particularly women, and if the society or the community is not ready to accept change, allow their women to get educated, literate, and make use of the government schemes of entrepreneurship, leadership, health, then state cannot do much. State efforts have to be juxtaposed with the efforts of the community also. We are having the examples of Christians and Parsis, where the efforts of the community are remarkable, and therefore Christian women and Parsi women have really made a difference by getting educated, by being economically independent, reducing their fertility rate, etc., etc. So we need to have all the efforts together to really make a minority community, and particularly the women of this community, uh, enjoy the benefits of development. Evaluating success indicators and accountability. Evaluating the effectiveness of minority welfare requires transparent indicators. The Niti Aayog SDG India Index 2023 ranks minority dense state lower on education, gender equality, and economic participation. The Ministry of Minority Affairs publishes annual performance reports, but independent audits are limited. Quantitative targets like number of beneficiaries often overshadow qualitative outcomes such as empowerment and awareness. Effective evaluation must combine data, field studies, and citizen feedback. Technology can enhance accountability through dashboards and geo-tagged project tracking. Civil society participation is extremely important. It ensures checks on corruption and bias, and it also creates momentum within the community. It makes the people aware of the importance of education, health, hygiene, women equality, gender justice, etc. Establishing a minority data observatory could also improve evidence-based policy making. Success should be measured not by funds spent but by disparities reduced. An evaluation-driven approach turns minority policy from symbolic welfare to structural justice. Accountability, transparency, and inclusivity together uphold the constitutional promise of equality, ensuring that every community experiences development as both a right and a live reality. To conclude, 75 years after independence, India's minority policy stands at a crossroad. Constitutional protections exist, but social economic inequalities persist. Lack of will on the part of the community remains as such. Not much difference has come. Those communities where the will is there from inside, they have made tremendous changes in their education, women rights, reformation in personal laws, education, economic independence, etc., etc. But the communities which are not willing to change are still facing problems, particularly the largest minority, that is the Muslims. Government schemes such as PMJVK, Nai Roshni and USTT-AD demonstrate intent, yet gaps in implementation which limit impact. The path towards forward requires integrating minority concerns into mainstream development, not isolating them as separate welfare efforts. Stronger institutions, transparent data systems, and continuous evaluation are essential. Empowerment must extend beyond statistics into classroom, workplace, and civic spaces. India's constitutional vision of equality, secularism, and dignity depends on realizing inclusion at the grassroots. Ensuring that minorities share equally in development is not only a social necessity but also a moral and constitutional obligation. The journey forward the journey towards equality continues not through tokenism but through persistent reform that makes justice accessible to every citizen in practice. But one last thing that I would like to emphasize here again is that when we talk about Uniform Civil Code, all the commissions and the civil society movements and the NGOs recommend that the reform should come from within. Then when it is the time of development, education, why do we not emphasize this fact that any improvement in education, economic development, condition of the women, social economic status of the minority community will also come from inside unless the community itself makes efforts. Government schemes, however good they may be, cannot do much to improve the social economic status of any community.
Thank you.